The nation of Israel is experiencing a dramatic renaissance never before seen in human history. In a land that was barren for nearly 2,000 years, life is bursting forth. Acres of vineyards and olive groves are transforming rocky mountains. From every nation on earth, Christian tourists are coming here by the millions, fulfilling their dreams of walking in the very places where their Savior walked. And most miraculously of all, Israel is once again becoming the home of the once scattered Jewish people. Over the last century, they have returned here by the millions, from the north, south, east, and west. We are living in the times spoken about long ago, the time that this nation would be reborn.
Herzl realized that the only solution to anti-Semitism was for the Jews to have their own state. By 1914, there were nearly 100,000 Jews living in Palestine. They had started 50 agricultural villages and farmed roughly 100,000 acres of land.
His Majesty's government views with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people.
After the American, British, and Allied forces defeated the Germans, hundreds of thousands of Jews came to Palestine, and the UN General Assembly passed a fateful plan to divide up Palestine into independent Arab and Jewish states.
Abstain.
As the roll call began, the proceedings were momentarily interrupted. A piercing cry came from the gallery. Ana Adonai Hoshiana. O Lord, please save us.
The United States? Yes? Yemen? No?
The resolution of the DAC Committee for Palestine was adopted by 33 votes, 13 against, 10 abstentions.
The stage was set. On the afternoon of May 14th, several council members met to approve the final draft of the declaration. The text was approved unanimously, but just hours before it would be read, the new state still didn't have a name. Historical names like Zion and Judea were proposed and rejected. It was Ben-Gurion who decided that the name would be simply Medinat Israel, the State of Israel. Despite the instructions for secrecy, the news had leaked out, and a large crowd gathered outside the museum. Jewish leaders were now racing the sunset to finish the ceremony before the Sabbath began at 5 o'clock. At 4 p.m., David Ben-Gurion called the meeting to order. The crowd rose and sang Hatikva. Then Ben-Gurion read the declaration aloud.
זוהי זכותו הטבעית של העם היהודי להיות ככל עם ועם עומד ברשות עצמו במדינתו הריבונית. תוקף זכותנו הטבעית וההיסטורית ועל יסוד החלטת עצרת האומות המאוחדות אנו מכריזים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל, היא מדינת ישראל.
President Truman recognized the new state of Israel just 11 minutes after the British mandate officially ended.
The United States recognizes the provisional government as the de facto authority of the new state of Israel.
He was cheering in the streets. It was a big thing, dancing in the streets and all this. And he was standing in the back there. He says, what the people are dancing here, what they don't know is tomorrow we've got a war.
It wasn't long before Ben-Gurion was proven right. In the Declaration of Independence, he had offered the Arabs an equal place in the new state. But that night, his olive branch was answered by the roar of Egyptian warplanes. At 1 minute past midnight, they bombed the city of Tel Aviv. And at dawn, tanks from 5 Arab armies rolled into the new state of Israel. A year later, in 1949, all sides had grown weary of fighting. Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, and Syria signed armistice agreements with Israel. The Jewish state had survived the first of many challenges to her existence.
At a meeting ending in the early hours of the morning, Defense Minister Dayan told the cabinet that only through a preemptive strike could Israel stand up to the Arab armies now massed along its borders. That strike, he added, must take place sooner rather than later. He then laid out the battle plan devised by the country's top military minds. The attack order was radioed from the Defense Ministry in Tel Aviv. Israeli planes took off at staggered intervals, heading for key Egyptian bases in the Sinai, the Suez, and Nile Valley. In just 7 minutes, the Israeli Air Force destroyed the Egyptian planes before moving on to rocket bomb enemy airfields. From the Temple Mount, the paratroopers sprinted to the western wall to clear it of snipers. There were serious casualties, but in minutes the battle was over. For the first time in 2,000 years, the old city of Jerusalem was in Jewish hands. And for many, it was a moment that was almost impossible to fathom.
Israel becomes increasingly in the world, there will be those who stand up for Israel with the faith and integrity of Abraham, and they will make all the difference.
Israel was founded 3 years after the Holocaust. 3 years after 70% of the Jews were destroyed in what is exponentially the largest slaughter of any people in human history, the remnant trickled back against the will of the British, with no support from the world, into a desert piece of real estate with no natural resources, no infrastructure, surrounded by millions of hostile Arabs in a constant state of warfare, terrorism, economic blockade. And think about it, within a few years, the desert is exporting fruits and vegetables to the rest of the world. That Israel is the only country in the world that has more trees at the end of the 20th century than the beginning. In terms of high-tech per capita, the most in the world is in Israel. Done in less than 40 years, with no natural resources, constant war, terrorism, economic blockade. It's unbelievable, but people just don't see it because we've gotten used to it. It's Jewish history. It's all supernatural.
I think I'm privileged to have grown up in a land where my grandfather, where his parents, where his forefathers only dreamed of living one day, of seeing built one day. This is home, and home is where you want to be.